Playing makes us human. All humans play. Some human play is so alive that just to witness it happening is enlivening. Often that play involves structured, mimetic role play in real time and space. The sparsely surviving records from before the year 1485 in England bear witness to ubiquitous playing, Robin Hood folk games for instance, but it's usually difficult to determine whether medieval English plays were dramatic or scripted, since the medieval English considered all types of play and game generically continuous, but never called any of it drama or theater, let alone high art, so few play texts were preserved with much care. The maimed surviving half of The Pride of Life, a morality play whose mirthful allegory for mortality, health, and income inequality resonates as much today as during the late 14th century plague, was itself mortal, destroyed in 1922.
Lecture English 330-2, The Pride of Life. So, for some of you, this was your first ever Middle English reading assignment. How was it? I hope that it was enjoyable at the very least, and I hope that the recording that you listened to alongside that reading helped with that. Again, if the reading feels too tough for any reason, don't worry. Trust the process. We're going to take you through it, and we're going to spend a lot of time in the coming weeks focusing on language itself. And if the reading seemed easy, right? If you've had experience with Middle English before, or you just happen to be a phenom at this, don't get complacent. Use this as an opportunity to dig deeply and slowly into the text. Give the text the amount of time that the syllabus calls for. Don't rush either way. We're going to, as I said, focus on Middle English learning in the coming weeks, and so I want to open up a document called 12 Tips for Middle English. I've shared a full but provisional draft of this on our course Google Drive file, but I wanted to zoom in on, quite literally zoom in, on 4 of these items now. So the one I'm talking about is at the top of the screen. Tip 2, make it make sense. Never chalk something up to nonsense. Every word is there for a reason, and when we're dealing with early texts, there's a tendency to just kind of excuse things that don't make any sense as though, well, times were different back then. Like if you wind up with a meaning like, then thin sons ate mat, it's not correct to conclude, well, I just figured that in those olden days, the son was physically thinner, and so sometimes devoured the Professor Sergi. Adjust your reading until it makes sense, right? Likely here it's probably, then thine sons ate meat. Moving to item 6. When you come to a word that doesn't seem to make sense, always mess with vowels first, right? So in the case of then thin sons ate mat to then thine sons ate meat, it's really just a difference of changing each vowel sound and messing around with those vowel sounds until it makes sense. I say here, modern vowels are stupid. Modern English vowels are pretty wacky, as we learned in the history of the English language, if you did take that course with me. So mess around to try to correct the damage modern spellers have done. Try switching out any vowel, and I'm reading again up here. Try switching out any vowel for any other vowel. What usually counts as a vowel, A, E, Y or I, which remember are interchangeable, also sometimes with J, O, U, which is sometimes interchangeable with V or W, H can be added or dropped, right? And any combination of vowels, 2 vowels together, whether in the modern spelling or not, or no letter, right? A null set is also a vowel. So looking at this sentence I have here, some replacement vowels are more likely in certain cases than others. I hope you can read those words and understand sort of how I messed with the vowels there. And remember, you can replace groups of vowels with one vowel or the other way around. Some replacement vowels are more likely than in certain cases than others, but it's better to get a feel for those tendencies than to memorize them. Moving up to number 5, certain letters are highly interchangeable. Y and I are interchangeable. I and J are interchangeable. The SCH or SH constructions or groupings of consonants can be interchangeable, so try switching those out. Also, very rarely, X will replace those. The letters C and K, just like in modern English, try switching those around. You can double the C or double the K. ER and RE the same way. V's can be U's, U's can be V's, either can be W. E's. If you see an E and it doesn't make sense, try dropping it. If adding an E would make sense, try adding one. You see this letter, the thorn, th, as in thank you, or th, as in there. The thorn represents the th sound. You'll usually see it just written out as th in the additions we're using, but keep your eye out for it. And sometimes you might want to switch that with a d sound and see if that helps. And finally, an es ending usually represents either a plural or what we would call an apostrophe s in modern English, a possessive s. Finally, item 4. There is neither standardized spelling nor standardized grammar. Play and be free. And the same word may be spelled differently within the same line. Try doubling or undoubling letters. Imagine that a single word can have multiple spellings. Think about what a word is. The idea that a spoken word precedes any given writing down of that word. So again, some tips to think about today. There is neither standardized spelling nor standardized grammar. So play and be free. Certain letters are highly interchangeable. Get to know those. When you come to a word that doesn't seem to make sense, mess with vowels first. And, number 2, always, when you can, make it make sense. But don't obsess. All right. So there we go. Zooming out of there. That's our brief Middle English training for the day, and I hope that it makes sense with what you've been doing with the Pride of Life thus far. The Pride of Life, composed probably in the late 14th century, written down probably circa 1400 to 1425. The Pride of Life, which is a play about mortality, about how death comes and challenges the arrogance of thinking that you'll always be alive, and how your strength and health are represented here by 2 knights who have sworn their fealty to you forever, right? Your strength and your health tell you, you're going to live forever, I'm always going to be with you, and I'm never going to turn on you, I'm never going to abandon you. Even though we don't have the ending to this play, we can guess that probably the ending involves the inevitable fact that everybody's strength and health leave them eventually. The production that we did, that you listened to some of the audio from, was done in the summer of 2016 using actors from the Toronto area, professional actors from the Toronto area, to act out the roles. And I was quite impressed with the work they did with this old text. They brought it to life. We talked about in the Robin Hood discussion about how the quality of a medieval playtext is about how well it leaves openings for life to come in, and it certainly seemed that way, the way that they acted it out. We took this production on tour through various locations in the UK and a couple on campus here in Canada, and they were presented to both academic and non-academic audiences. The approach we took is that the parts of the manuscript that have not survived, rather than putting brackets, right, the places that there are brackets around in your edition are places that are not in the manuscript, but that the editor is providing an educated guess for what probably was there. Rather than providing those educated guesses, we encouraged the audience, improv style, to throw in what they thought should happen. And we did this performance for academic and non-academic audiences. Notably, the academic audiences tended to force the Pride of Life to take the shape that they recognized from other early English morality plays, even though the Pride of Life, so one sort of followed an everyman model, even though everyman is separated by the Pride of Life by up to a century and a half. And the other medieval morality plays generally happened, everyman started in Holland, and the other medieval morality plays started in the east of England, while if we can locate the Pride of Life anywhere, it's probably associated with the English-speaking areas of Ireland in the 14th century. So there's really no reason to connect this morality play so closely with other morality plays except through the resemblance of the genre, which means that, again, fresh eyes are incredibly useful here. And what I did find was that the improvisations that were thrown in by the audience when they started to direct the action about how they thought it should be filled in and end, all of the conclusions they came to seemed to me largely valid in terms of what would fit in a medieval context. Because, again, we're talking about something somewhat universal here, about the way we deal with mortality. Even though death comes for us in a variety of different ways, it always does come. And we've been thinking about mortality right now a lot. We are going through a pandemic, so we are more conscious than we normally might be about the fact that as much as it seems like your strength and your health and your mirth are noble, are loyal to you no matter what, they can leave you, whether that is a slow abandonment over time or a sudden abandonment if you should, for instance, face illness. We can't know how strength and health leave life behind in this play, but we get the distinct impression that they do. So we've been thinking a lot about mortality for obvious reasons in the present day. The Pride of Life is composed in the late 14th century, and they were thinking about mortality in similar ways. Now, I want to preface this point by saying that I really resist the sort of historicist fallacy of assuming that a medieval text, particularly a medieval play, is always inflected by and responding to the big headline events that are happening at a given time. For one thing, as we're beginning to learn, medieval plays are rarely datable with that much accuracy. It's not as though medieval people were as consistently and continually informed and sort of needled by daily headlines as we are when we're looking at our smartphones, right? So the idea that the daily headlines would be the subject that's always being allegorized is sort of specious in most cases. But the Black Death comes to England in circa 1348 to 49. As far as we know, it hits the south coast of England. It comes along with boats that land in the south coast of England around that area in later 1348, and by 1349 it's spread across the entire island. By 1350 it kills about 1/3 of the English population. We generally use the term that they use, the Black Death, for the first emergence of the Yersinia pestis bacteria, the infection from that bacteria. There are multiple resurgences of the plague across subsequent decades, and indeed subsequent centuries, particularly, as we'll see here in quoting from J.N. Hayes, the Black Death of 1347 to 1350, this is the first big emergence of plague, seriously reduced the population of Europe. Mortality, it is now generally agreed, was in the range of 30 to 40%, in some places higher, in some places lower. In England it was that amount. But the plague's impact on the European population did not end in 1350. Although controversy continues about just when the population began to grow again, much local evidence suggests that repeated visitations of plague in the years after 1350 contributed to holding populations down. The population of Cuxham, this is an English village, in 1377 had reached only 1/3 of its 1348 level, so that's over 30 years. Many writers, in fact, see no real recovery of growth in the European population until the end of the 15th century. For this remarkable period of declining or stagnant populations, the plague bears at least some responsibility. Once plague established itself in the 1340s, it remained an almost constant menace for over 300 years, and what may be properly called a prolonged plague pandemic. Jean-Noël Biarbin has compiled tables which claim that plague was present somewhere in Europe every year between 1347 and 1670. The most serious and widespread episodes followed on the heels of the Great Black Death. Thus, the epidemics of the early 1360s and middle 1370s, though overshadowed by the 1347 to 50 catastrophe, ranked as demographic disasters in their own right. So this is one of those few historical events that I can say must affect our reading of plays, particularly English plays about mortality. The Pride of Life still leaves a lot of room for interpretation. It is a morality play, and by morality play, we'll return to this a lot of times, but by morality play I mean a psychomachic allegory. That is a personified allegory for the right way to live a life, right? Theoretically, anyone's life. But in this play we have life itself, and we really might say vitality itself, personified in the king. The number of times health and strength affirm that they will be ever faithful seem to obviously foreshadow their failure to stay and protect. But is that death a sudden, unexpected death, which could defeat strength and health even in their prime? Is it a slow, inevitable abandonment or betrayal? We don't know how the ending comes for King Life. We only know for sure that it does. We also have the characters of the Queen and Bishop. Usually in a morality play, though not always, all of the characters personify something. If the Queen and Bishop personify something other than a queen and a bishop, we don't find out what it is in the part of the text that survives. And then there's also a character named Death, who is personified, at least in indirect speech so far, as an enemy king. We keep warning that this king, Death, is on his way, will arrive at any point. So the assumption is that he will arrive. We have reason to believe that he would have arrived in the full version of the play. This is lines 81 through 108. This is the prologue that happens at the beginning of the play, as you know. And in that prologue, we had strength and health speak the lines, but in the manuscript there's no speaker attached to the lines. So much like one of you suggested that a narrator might enter into the Robin Hood play, and completely might, here some sort of narrative voice gives us the prologue about what we can expect in the play to come. The play manuscript is again incomplete, and so this holds surely some clues for what the missing part had. Death comes. Again, we know death has to come, because death always has to come. He dreams a dreadful dream. There are multiple other meanings that dream could have, by the way. Well ought all care, both in the sense of care and also be afraid. Notice the spelling of acht, right? A-G-H-T-E for ought. That's another example of how in Middle English you should mess with your vowel sounds, and then you'll find your way there. Just say it out loud. And death slew father and mother, and then him, uncle. He ne would none spare, right? He would not none spare. Middle English accepts double negatives, by the way. Soon after it befell, it occurred, that death and life be taken together, right? They happen in the same place. Now we see those capital D and capital L for death and life. That signifies to us that they are character names rather than concepts, but those capital letters are usually inserted by the modern editor, so keep that in mind. But here it seems to be clearly talking about characters. I agree with the editor here. Okay, so this is what we already know probably will happen, though the information about the father and mother and then uncle. At some point in the play, do we meet the father, mother, and uncle of King Life? Or are these just what he hears off stage? He's like, they caught my mother and father? I don't know. When the body is brought down, the soul sorrow awakes. The body's pride is bought dearly. The soul, the fiends take. Right? Does this mean that the body and soul emerge as two new characters? Should these be capitalized? There's no way of knowing. And through prayer of Our Lady mild, the soul and body should split. This is a dualist approach. She will pray to her son so mild. She will repay. She will repay goodness. So if there was goodness in the life, Our Lady will pray to her son to allow the soul and body to split and to save the soul. Our Lady here refers pretty clearly to the Virgin Mary. This would be the mother of Jesus. Medieval Catholics held the Virgin Mary in particularly high esteem. Particularly English medieval Catholics did so, more so than modern Catholics do today. She was essentially a female, almost a female divinity. Does that mean that the Virgin Mary we should imagine as a character that comes out at the end? Who knows? Or does it mean that simply the characters on stage pray to the Virgin Mary? This happens a lot in the morality play Mankind. They're continually calling out to Our Lady for a kind of help to what's going on, or at least the pious characters are. But Our Lady never appears as a character. She's just understood to always be present and watching. That leaves a lot of room for interpretation, particularly because we don't know what elements of that story are to be actually enacted in morality play style and which are not. Written on one side of a parchment account roll from the Priory of the Holy Trinity in Dublin. It appears on the back of the accounts for 30 June 1343 to 5 January 1344. Since the play is fitted into the blank spaces around the accounts, this would provide an earliest possible date for its composition. Here again we have a play that only happens to survive because it was preserved on the back of a financial record being the thing that must be saved. So The Pride of Life could have been composed at any point during this period. And normally I would say that would make it inapplicable to historicist readings that would read it alongside a particular event in history. But unfortunately, the event in history that I was bringing up earlier is going on the entire time that the composition could have happened. No more is the grave undertones coming through than in the bishop character. The bishop comes out and sort of in what we might expect in a postmodern play, out of nowhere gives a ridiculously long monologue. The space above it before the monologue has been lost to time, so we don't know what leads into this monologue. He talks about government corruption. This is a very Bernie Sanders monologue, if I may. The part I want to focus on here. The bishop says, "These rich men be ruthless. The poor go to the ground. And false men be shameless. This truth I have found. It is wrong what the rich knight does all to the poor. That is seen far, day and night. Whoso will say the truth. Perhaps men hold me a fool to say that true tale. They fair as fish in a pool, as the great eat the small. It's a powerful speech, and I hope its power reached you, despite its kind of campy over-the-topness. Right? The king, of course, resists this. The king hears that, and the king is, of course, a powerful character. So now he's not just representing life and the arrogance of believing something will live forever, but a specific kind of arrogance that gets attached to a certain class. And that arrogance is being undercut by a religious figure. Whatever the actual experience of the church on the ground may have been for the playmakers, on which much more later about practical Catholicism versus top-down Catholicism. Here, learned salvation and personal religion and education are characterized reasonably as a force that counteracts oppressive power. That's also a lot of the rhetoric that's being thrown around in 1381 about what is Christian, what a right Christian should do. In 1381, the peasants revolt. This also spreads across England pretty thoroughly, though it does not last nearly as long as the Pride of Life. It's over in a couple of months.
It's no coincidence that economic unrest leading to the rebellion of those who have been oppressed should happen at a time of pandemic. And the reasons for that, I'm sure you're already familiar with, but I'll go over it in more detail in a couple of moments.
The Latin is on the right, and then the translation is on the left. Order upon petition of the collectors and controllers in Kent of the subsidy last granted to the king by laymen, showing that the rolls of names of those dwelling in Kent, the indentures and other evidences concerning the collection were burned by the commons of the county in their late insurrection, and that the collectors have not wherewithal to account. That is, the collectors of debt and of indentures, right? Evidences concerning the collection. Note that when the peasants revolt, they revolt against the records that keep track of who is at which social level, thus making it harder to move beyond it. I think of that final scene in Fight Club where Tyler Durden, for those of you who have seen the movie, if that's still a reference that we recognize, where Tyler Durden is calling for the destruction of credit records, regardless of whether the things that were called for by the peasants in terms of policy change were enacted, and many of them were not, even though they were promised. There were powerful people who were forcibly removed, and there were records of people's oppression that were destroyed to the degree that the collections could no longer occur. Here, text itself is something that can be attacked. Starting in 1350, a third of the English population has been killed. That means that the largest classes of people become more powerful. That is, laborers find that their labor is more valuable, because now 2/3 of the laborers are available to do all of the work that the full labor force had been doing. The multiple resurgences continue to keep population levels low or to take population levels lower. What that means is that everybody's work is worth more than it was before. And that means that they feel more empowered to take a stand for better treatment. It shifts the ecology of how people think about income inequality in medieval England. Which brings us to the Pride of Life manuscript. As while the improvisations of the actors on one of the days suggested that it was cigarette burns and breakups that caused the damage to the manuscript and that it's full of holes, it's not quite that. You can see that it's just the edges of the pages through wear have been destroyed, and so a lot of the beginnings of lines have been lost. But the one thing that gets repeated again and again, that he thus far, at least in the play we have, ignores, is this. Though thou be king, you shall have an end. Death overcomes all things, howsoever we wend. Notice wend is a familiar word here that means however we go, or however we fare, or however we behave. She, that is the queen, loves him ghostly, spiritually, in heart. And some things him, we don't know what that word is, it's cut off, to beware of his end. Notice that H can be lobbed off if you wish, right? Beware of your ending. So this is the bishop. And also that you are a frail, leanest man, and you had a beginning, and evermore have thought upon your dreadful ending. The bishop says that the king, like any rich person, should remember his ending. Remember that you will have an ending too. You had a beginning, you'll have an ending. Does this play's apparent address to the rich and powerful? suggest that the imagined audience was itself rich and powerful, or does it suggest the opposite? Or both? Think about it on your own terms, because it is your terms that fill in the blanks. Why is it appropriate specifically to say to the insatiably greedy and powerful, those whose greed is causing great harm to the poor, like big fish eating the small, that they should remember their ending, that those rich people should remember that they are mortal, that they'll die? Is it just to save their souls? To save their souls from hell in case they don't repent in time and learn to be generous? Or are there other reasons that we might address this play specifically to the tendency of the rich to forget that they are mortal? I'll leave that to you for thought questions to bring up in discussion. And yet, there's also a cosmic irony here. Have you picked up on it yet? All of the characters have said, remember your ending will come. Guess what? It doesn't. What to make of the cosmic irony, the fact that a mortality play, get it, a morality play, that's a mortality play, whose moral is remember your ending, has, because of the randomness of fate, no ending. Or even that endless manuscript, that manuscript that is endless in the sense of being timeless, because it still resonates to us now, because in our pandemic we can still feel the same way that they felt in their pandemic about the fact that your strength and your health are not as loyal to you as they may seem. So wear a mask. Your strength and health are not that loyal to you as they may seem. That things change, that you should think about your mortality when you're making decisions for your life and how you want to live it. Whether or not you believe in an afterlife, that's true. You should think about how you treat people less powerful than yourself. You are immortal too, right? But this play that is endless, both because it has a timeless message and because its ending has been shaved off by the vicissitudes of time, itself met its death. I quote David Klausner, the whole surviving portion of the manuscript, this is the part that we have read. The surviving half of the manuscript was destroyed in June 1922, when the Four Courts building in Dublin, in which the manuscript had been placed, along with others belonging to the canons of Christ Church Dublin, was blown up. Fortunately, a transcription had been made of the play in 1891. I keep forgetting to change that typo. In 1891, along with a photographic facsimile of part of the roll, made by what was available then, a zinc-based photographic method. The photograph and the scholar's transcription are now the only surviving records of the original text. The photograph is not terribly clear. Now, I've seen a copy of it. You can still align the letters that Mills wrote down with the words, right? But the manuscript itself died. I'm not going to read straight through this narrative of the troubles in Ireland and the beginning of the Civil War, the Irish Civil War in Ireland beginning in 1922, but I do want to, and you can pause this and read it in full if you wish, this is from the Dublin City Council website. The part I want to take a look at now is just what it looked like, right? On Friday, June 30th, Dublin shook to its foundations. This is 1922, and an ominous gray cloud mushroomed above the Four Courts. In the eerie quiet which followed, when even the guns went quiet, a paper snow fell upon the city, and 1,000 years of public records came to rest upon the dusty streets. Again, rebels fighting back against power, known to direct their anger toward records, towards texts. And we learn that those texts are mortal too. Maybe you could comfort yourself now in believing that, well, King Life and the maimed piece of a past culture that's encoded in his play will now live on anyway. Because even though the manuscript met its ending, right, the manuscript did die, right, but it's the text that lives on. That's why we were able to read it. Of course it lives on. That's how we were able to read the text. Perhaps you might say, well, that's the thing. Manuscripts, written texts, are obviously mortal, are subject to unexpected sudden loss. And printed texts, like the ones in the Four Courts building, are subject to unexpected loss. And certainly the zinc-based photographs that they used to work with then are blurry and we lose those. But we don't have to worry about the tangibility of a manuscript and how it can get lost, because digitized text lasts forever. We don't have to worry about losing things in that way. You may think that the haphazard erasure of history, or the conscious and purposeful destruction of history is a thing of history. And it doesn't apply now that we don't have to worry about the preservation of and study of the past. Now that we keep our records and our text, let alone our financial records and our wealth, safely replicatable in the cloud, the immortal space that can't be touched by time, that what you write down now will last forever. I wonder what the Queen and the Bishop would have to say to that. From here, your assignment is to read for a set amount of time, and that amount of time is recorded in your schedule of readings in the syllabus. The Castle of Perseverance. I'd like you to skip the introduction to the Castle of Perseverance now and just focus on the text itself. Read as far as you can. We will be returning to the Castle of Perseverance again and again and again throughout term. So this is one of the ones that we get to read slowly and think through. Jump in, make whatever sense of it you can, and be ready to discuss it on Monday. And so enjoy it. Try to be open to the really enjoyable parts of it and the really affecting parts of it. Enjoy reading The Castle of Perseverance, and I will see you on Monday.